The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls made of some strange material that seemed to shift colors with the mood of those inside. Today those walls pulsed with shades of deep red and angry orange. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the vast space, their forms as different as the worlds they came from. Admiral Sarah Chen sat in the human section, a small cluster of seats near the back of the hall. She watched as the various alien delegates moved about, their conversations creating a symphony of sounds that no human throat could make. The Zephyrians clicked and whistled through their beak-like mouths. The Multar Collective members communicated through soft pulses of light that traveled across their translucent skin. The massive Corvan warriors stamped their feet in rhythm, which Chen had learned was their way of showing agreement. For 300 years, humanity had been part of this council. They were not the strongest species, nor the oldest, nor the wisest according to the other members. But they had earned their place through hard work and careful diplomacy. Human engineers built the stations that connected distant worlds. Human soldiers fought in the border conflicts that kept the peace. Human merchants carried goods to places other species found too dangerous or unprofitable. Today felt different, though. Chen could sense the tension in the air like the static before a thunderstorm. She had received reports from her contacts throughout the council chambers. Something big was coming, and the humans had not been invited to the planning meetings. Councillor Velthak rose from his seat at the center of the hall. His crystalline body caught the light and threw it around the room in dancing patterns. The hegemony had always been one of the most powerful factions in the council, and Velthak had led them for nearly 50 years. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that came from commanding the respect of hundreds of worlds. "Fellow members of the Galactic Council," he began, his words translated instantly into every language spoken in the hall. "We gather today to address a growing concern that threatens the very foundation of our peaceful galaxy." Chen felt her stomach tighten. She had been a diplomat long enough to recognize the tone in Velthak's voice. This was not going to be a discussion. This was going to be a pronouncement. "For too long," Velthak continued, "we have allowed a species with dangerous tendencies to operate freely among us. The humans have shown time and again that their first instinct is violence. They solve problems with force when wisdom would serve better. They seek conflict where others would find peace." Around the hall, Chen could see heads nodding in agreement. The Ethereals, who had never forgiven humanity for defeating them in the Proxima conflict 30 years ago, were particularly enthusiastic in their support. The Trade Federation representatives were calculating the economic benefits they could gain from controlling human labor and resources. "Therefore," Velthak announced, "I present to this council Resolution 847 Omega. This resolution calls for the immediate cessation of all human military activities throughout council space. All human warships are to be surrendered to council control within one standard galactic month. All human colonies are to be placed under direct council oversight to ensure they do not develop any technologies or capabilities that could threaten galactic peace." The hall erupted in discussion. Some species cheered the announcement. Others seemed shocked by its scope. Chen felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her feet. They were not just limiting human military power. They were making humanity a subject species little better than slaves. The voting began immediately. There was no time for debate, no opportunity for the humans to present their case. One by one, the species announced their positions. The hegemony voted in favor, of course. The Ethereals followed suit with obvious pleasure. The Trade Federation saw profit in the arrangement and supported it enthusiastically. Chen watched in growing horror as species after species voted to strip humanity of its independence. Some were motivated by fear of human military capability. Others saw economic opportunity in controlling human colonies. A few seemed to vote in favor simply because they had never liked humans in the first place. When the Corvan Republic's turn came, Chen held her breath. The Corvans had been humanity's closest allies for decades. They had fought side by side in 3 different conflicts. Surely they would stand with humanity now. "The Corvan Republic abstains," announced their representative. Chen felt the betrayal like a physical blow. Even their oldest friends were abandoning them rather than risk opposing the majority. The final tally appeared on the great display screens throughout the hall. 847 votes in favor, 23 votes against, 156 abstentions. The resolution had passed by an overwhelming margin. Velthak's crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction as he read the final proclamation. By the authority vested in this council by the Charter of Galactic Peace, humanity is hereby ordered to comply with Resolution 847 Omega within one standard galactic month. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action by the full military might of the council. Chen sat in stunned silence as the session ended around her. Delegates from various species came to offer their condolences or to express hope that humanity would see the wisdom in accepting their new status. She nodded and made polite responses, but her mind was elsewhere. As she made her way to the shuttle bay, Chen activated her secure communicator and sent a coded message back to Earth. The message was short and simple, but its implications would shake the galaxy to its foundations. Council has overplayed their hand. Recommend activating all contingency protocols immediately. The shuttle ride back to the human embassy gave Chen time to think. For 3 centuries, humanity had played the role of the junior member, the useful but not threatening species that could be counted on to do the hard work while others made the important decisions. But that had all been an act, a careful performance designed to lull the galaxy into a false sense of security. The truth was that humanity had never stopped being what they had always been on Earth. Apex predators who survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more ruthless than anything else in their environment. They had simply hidden that nature behind a mask of civilized behavior and diplomatic protocol. Now the mask was about to come off. As her shuttle approached the human embassy, Chen could see the activity already beginning. Ships that had been in port for maintenance were powering up their engines. Cargo vessels that officially carried trade goods were preparing to depart with more mysterious cargo. Communication arrays that the Council believed were used for peaceful purposes were suddenly transmitting on frequencies that did not appear on any official registry. The Council had made a simple but fatal error. They had mistaken humanity's restraint for weakness, their diplomacy for submission, their patience for acceptance of inferior status. They were about to learn the difference between a species that chose peace and a species that was incapable of war. Chen smiled grimly as she watched the preparations beginning around her. Humanity had spent 3 centuries building, planning, and preparing for exactly this moment. The Council had given them 1 month to surrender their independence. They were going to use that month to remind the galaxy why Earth's children had conquered their entire world and why they had never met a problem they could not solve with sufficient application of intelligence, determination, and controlled violence. The war that was coming would not be like anything the galaxy had ever seen before, because humanity had never intended to fight a fair war. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the heart of Luna Base, watching as screens around him came alive with data streams that had been dormant for 40 years. The facility officially did not exist. According to all public records, this section of the moon was nothing more than old mining tunnels that had been abandoned when better extraction sites were found in the asteroid belt. The reality was very different. Project Pandora had been humanity's most closely guarded secret since the first human ships had left Earth's solar system. Every human government had contributed to it. Every human colony had sent resources and personnel. And now, after decades of careful preparation, it was finally time to open the box. Admiral Chen's coded message had arrived just 6 hours ago, but the response had been immediate and overwhelming. Across human space, installations that had pretended to be peaceful research stations were revealing their true purpose. Mining operations that had claimed to extract rare metals for industrial use were suddenly producing materials that no civilian operation should have been able to create. Webb pulled up the status reports flowing in from across the galaxy. On Mars, the Olympus shipyards were dropping their carefully maintained facade. The merchant vessels that had been under construction there were splitting apart to reveal weapon systems that violated 17 different galactic treaties. Railguns that could punch through the armor of any known warship. Energy shields that could deflect attacks from entire fleets. Propulsion systems that made human ships faster and more maneuverable than anything the Council had ever seen. In the asteroid belt, the mining operations were working at maximum capacity to extract the exotic materials needed for humanity's most advanced weapons. Elements that the galaxy had never learned to use because they were too dangerous to handle. Compounds that could only be created in the zero-gravity environments that humans had mastered better than any other species. But perhaps most importantly, The generation ships that had been exploring the outer rim of the galaxy for the past century were finally revealing their true mission. They had not been searching for new worlds to colonize. They had been establishing hidden bases and supply depots throughout Council space. They had been placing sleeper agents and weapons caches on worlds that the Council considered secure. Webb's personal favorite was the AI development program. Every species in the galaxy had banned artificial intelligence after the synthetic wars had nearly destroyed the Coronathi homeworld 2 centuries ago. The ban was absolute and universal. No species was permitted to develop thinking machines under any circumstances. Humanity had signed the treaty and then immediately began violating it. They had been careful, of course. The AIs were never connected to public networks. They were never used in situations where other species might detect them. But they had been growing, learning, and preparing for exactly this moment. The main display screen in Webb's control room showed the activation status of systems across human space. Green lights were appearing by the dozen as projects that had been dormant for decades came online. Weapons that existed only in theoretical plans were being assembled by automated systems. Ships that had never been tested in combat were running their final system checks. President Martinez appeared on the communication screen, broadcasting from the Emergency Command Center beneath the UN headquarters in Geneva. Her message was being transmitted on every frequency that humanity could access, ensuring that every species in the galaxy would hear it clearly. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice calm and steady, despite the magnitude of what she was announcing. "Today the Galactic Council has chosen to see humanity as a threat to their vision of peace. They have decided that our independence is incompatible with their desire for control. They have given us 30 days to surrender our freedom and accept the status of a subject species." Webb watched as translation programs spread the president's words across thousands of worlds in hundreds of languages. This message was not just for humans. It was for every species that had ever wondered what would happen if someone stood up to the Council's authority. "The Council is correct about one thing," Martinez continued. "Humanity is indeed a threat to their peace. We are a threat to any peace that is built on the subjugation of free peoples. We are a threat to any order that places the convenience of the powerful above the rights of the independent. We are a threat to any system that seeks to deny entire species the right to determine their own destiny." Around the Luna-based control room, technicians were coordinating with their counterparts on a dozen different worlds. The orbital platforms that protected human colonies were powering up weapon systems that the Council had never known existed. Defensive installations that appeared on no official military registry were coming online for the first time since they had been built. Therefore, Martinez announced, "Humanity formally rejects Resolution 847 Omega and all claims of Council authority over human affairs. We will not surrender our ships. We will not submit to Council oversight. We will not accept the status of a subject species." Webb smiled as he watched the data feeds showing human military assets across the galaxy. The Council had made their decision based on what they thought they knew about human capabilities. They had seen the official fleet lists, the public military budgets, the declared weapon systems. They thought they understood what humanity could bring to bear in a conflict. They were about to discover that everything they thought they knew was wrong. The defense platforms around Earth were the first to demonstrate the new reality. Structures that the Council had catalogued as simple orbital stations suddenly unfolded to reveal massive weapon systems. Railguns that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Energy weapons that drew power from the planet's fusion reactors. Missile systems that could launch self-guided warheads across interstellar distances. But the real surprise was the ships themselves. The human fleet that the Council knew about consisted of perhaps 300 vessels of various sizes, respectable for a species of humanity's age and development, but hardly threatening to a galaxy that could field tens of thousands of warships. What the Council did not know about were the ships that had been built in secret shipyards, hidden throughout human space, vessels that incorporated technologies the galaxy had never seen before, ships that could engage entire fleets and win, weapons platforms that made the most advanced Council dreadnoughts look like primitive relics. "The Council has given us 30 days to comply with their demands," Martinez said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "We will use those 30 days to remind them why humanity earned its place in this galaxy, through strength, not through charity. We will use those 30 days to demonstrate what happens when you corner a species that has never lost a war. Webb activated his personal communication system and began coordinating with project directors across human space. It was time to implement plans that had been decades in the making. It was time to deploy weapons that had been built in secret and tested only in the deepest reaches of space where no other species could observe them. The artificial intelligence systems were coming online across human space, their processing power being directed toward a single goal: the complete military defeat of the Galactic Council. These were not the simple computer programs that other species used for navigation and calculation. These were true thinking machines, capable of learning, adapting, and making decisions that no biological mind could match. As Webb watched the status displays, he reflected on the irony of the situation. The Council had wanted to strip humanity of its military capabilities because they feared what humans might do with advanced weapons. But in their attempt to disarm humanity, they had forced humans to reveal just how advanced their weapons had become. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had spent the last 3 centuries preparing for exactly this moment. They had built weapons that violated treaties they had never intended to honor. They had developed technologies that the galaxy had banned for good reason. They had created military capabilities that no species in galactic history had ever possessed. And now they were going to use all of it. The Council wanted to know what humanity was capable of when they felt threatened. They were about to find out in the most direct way possible, because humanity had never been the peaceful, submissive species that they had pretended to be. They had always been predators. They had simply been very, very patient predators. Now the hunting season was about to begin. The first shots of the war were fired simultaneously across 17 star systems, and within the first hour, it became clear that the Galactic Council had made a terrible miscalculation. What they had expected to be a simple enforcement action against a stubborn but ultimately powerless species had become something else entirely. A demonstration of why humanity had conquered an entire planet and why they had never learned to accept defeat. Admiral Velnoth of the Zephyrian Second Fleet had been confident when his ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 440 system. His fleet consisted of 47 advanced warships, including 3 dreadnoughts that were considered among the most powerful vessels in the galaxy. The human colony in this system had a population of only 12 million, and was defended by what Council intelligence believed to be 6 outdated patrol ships. Velnoth's confidence lasted exactly 14 minutes. The first sign that something was wrong came when his sensors detected massive energy signatures from what appeared to be the planet's mining platforms. These structures, according to all available data, were simple orbital facilities designed to extract rare metals from the planet's crust. They had been inspected by Council officials just 2 years earlier and found to contain nothing more threatening than industrial mining equipment. As Velnoth watched in growing alarm, those mining platforms began to unfold like deadly flowers. Armor plating slid aside to reveal weapon systems that should not have existed. Rails guns emerged from hidden compartments, their massive barrels turning to track his fleet. Energy collectors that had appeared to be simple solar arrays reconfigured themselves into focusing lenses for weapons that drew power directly from the system's star. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with disbelief, "those platforms are showing energy outputs consistent with battleship-class weapons. Multiple battleship-class weapons per platform." Before Velnoth could respond, the platforms opened fire. The first salvo consisted of solid projectiles accelerated to nearly 10% of light speed. At those velocities, the kinetic energy alone was enough to punch through any known shield system and armor configuration. The lead dreadnought, the pride of the Zephyrian fleet, simply disintegrated when 3 such projectiles struck it simultaneously. But the railguns were only the beginning. The energy weapons that followed were unlike anything in the Council's arsenal. Instead of the focused beam weapons that most species used, these were broad-spectrum emissions that seemed to interfere with the fundamental forces that held matter together. Ships that were struck by these weapons did not explode so much as they came apart at the molecular level. Within 20 minutes of entering the system, Velnoth's fleet had been reduced from 47 ships to 8, and those 8 were only still functional because the human platforms had stopped firing. Apparently satisfied that the threat had been Neutralized Velnoth's final transmission before his flagship was destroyed spoke of impossible human technology and weapons that should not exist. His confusion was understandable. The Council had spent centuries cataloging and controlling the military capabilities of member species. They thought they knew what humanity was capable of. They had been wrong about everything. Captain Zara Okafor stood on the bridge of the human dreadnought Retribution, watching as her ship's AI coordinated attacks across multiple light-years of space in real time. RE-7 was one of the more advanced artificial intelligences that humanity had developed, and watching it work was like observing a master strategist who could think at the speed of light. Where the Council saw individual battles scattered across the galaxy, RE-7 saw a single vast equation being solved through the application of controlled violence. Every Council ship destroyed was a variable being eliminated. Every strategic position captured was a new calculation being added to the solution. Every alliance broken or treaty abandoned was simply another factor being optimized. Ares, Okafor said. Status report on Operation Thunderbolt. The AI's response came immediately, projected as both audio and visual data directly into Okafor's consciousness through her neural interface. This technology was another violation of galactic law, as most species considered direct brain-computer interfaces to be dangerous and unnatural. Humans had developed them anyway because they provided a tactical advantage that was too significant to ignore. Operation Thunderbolt is proceeding ahead of schedule, Ares reported. Council forces in the Vega sector have been eliminated with 96% efficiency. The Betelgeuse defensive line collapsed after the deployment of our molecular disruptors. Council resistance in the Proxima cluster ceased after their command ship was captured by our boarding AI. That last item was particularly significant. Humanity had developed artificial intelligences that could exist as pure information, transferring themselves through communication systems and taking control of enemy vessels from the inside. It was a form of warfare that no biological species had ever conceived of, because no biological species had ever developed AI that was truly intelligent rather than simply programmed. The Council's military doctrine was based on centuries of experience, fighting wars between biological species with similar capabilities and limitations. They expected battles to be fought between ships of roughly equal capability, with victory going to whichever side had better tactics, more ships, or superior positioning. What they got instead was something that their military theorists had never planned for: total technological superiority, combined with strategic thinking that operated at superhuman speeds. Humanity did not just have better weapons than the Council, though they did. They did not just have better ships, though they did. They had a fundamentally different approach to warfare that treated entire star systems as single tactical units and entire sectors as minor pieces in a larger strategic game. The conversion protocols were perhaps the most terrifying aspect of humanity's military capability. When human forces captured a Council ship, they did not simply add it to their fleet. They infected it with AI systems that rebuilt the vessel from the inside out, optimizing its design for human tactical doctrine and integrating it into their distributed command network. Council crews who were captured found themselves working for human commanders who treated them better than their own officers ever had. Human medical technology extended their lifespans and improved their health. Human educational systems unlocked potential that their rigid, caste-based societies had never allowed them to develop. Human administrative methods eliminated the corruption and inefficiency that had plagued their home governments for centuries. The psychological impact was devastating. Within months of the war's beginning, Council forces were surrendering not because they were defeated but because they wanted to be captured. Entire fleets defected to humanity without firing a shot, their crews having decided that life under human rule was preferable to continued service to the Council. But perhaps the most significant aspect of humanity's military campaign was what they were holding back. Intelligence reports from captured Council facilities indicated that the weapon systems being used against Council forces were designated as legacy platforms in human military documentation. The truly advanced weapons remained unused, apparently being held in reserve for threats that the Council had not yet presented. This raised terrifying questions about the actual scope of human military capability. If the weapons that were systematically destroying the Council's fleets were considered outdated by human standards, what were the current generation systems capable of? And what kind of threats was humanity preparing to face that required weapons more advanced than those that could eliminate entire fleets in minutes? Dr. Webb, monitoring the war from his control center on Luna Base, found himself impressed by the efficiency of humanity's military machine. The plans that had been developed over decades were being executed with precision that even he had not expected. Every contingency had been anticipated. Every possible council response had been planned for. Every strategic objective was being achieved ahead of schedule. The galaxy was learning what Earth's apex predators were capable of when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The careful mask of diplomacy and restraint had been discarded, revealing the true nature of the species that had conquered an entire planet through superior intelligence, adaptability, and controlled aggression. The Council had wanted to know what humanity would do when forced to choose between submission and war. They had their answer now, written in the wreckage of their fleets and the surrender of their allies. Humanity chose war, and humanity was very, very good at war. 6 months after the first shots were fired, Counselor Velthak stood alone in his private chambers, staring at tactical displays that told a story of complete and total defeat. The great crystalline spires of his home world stretched out below his window, but even they seemed diminished now, shadows of their former glory in a galaxy that no longer belonged to the species that had once ruled it. 37 council worlds had fallen to human forces. But fallen was not really the right word for what had happened. The humans had not conquered these worlds in the traditional sense. They had transformed them into something entirely different, something that made the old council system look primitive and cruel by comparison. The reports that came in from the occupied territories were almost impossible to believe. On Zephyria Prime, the rigid caste system that had defined society for millennia had been replaced by a merit-based system where individuals could advance based on their abilities and achievements rather than their birth circumstances. The average lifespan of citizens had increased by 40% thanks to human medical technology. Crime had virtually disappeared after human administrators had implemented AI-assisted justice systems that were incapable of corruption or bias. On Moltar 7th, the carefully maintained social hierarchies that had preserved order for centuries were crumbling, as young Moltar embraced human concepts of individual achievement and personal freedom. The ancient councils of elders who had made decisions for their people were being replaced by democratically elected governments that actually represented the will of the population. Most disturbing of all was the ethereal homeworld of Serenthia. The ethereals had been among humanity's most bitter enemies, having never forgiven them for the defeat in the Proxima conflict. Yet within 3 months of human occupation, ethereal artists were producing works that incorporated human music and visual styles. Young ethereals were learning human languages and adopting human customs. Some were even volunteering to serve in human military units, abandoning their species' traditional pacifism to fight alongside the soldiers who had conquered them. The psychological impact on the remaining council forces was devastating. It was one thing to lose battles to superior weapons and tactics. It was another thing entirely to watch entire populations willingly embrace the rule of their conquerors. Desertion rates in council fleets had reached catastrophic levels as soldiers and officers decided that they would rather surrender to human forces than continue fighting a war that their own people no longer supported. Velthak activated his personal communication system and reviewed the latest intelligence reports from council agents operating in human-controlled space. What he read there destroyed what little hope he had left for victory. The humans were not simply occupying conquered worlds. They were making them better in every measurable way. Human agricultural techniques had ended food shortages that some worlds had endured for generations. Human manufacturing processes had created jobs and prosperity where there had been poverty and desperation. Human educational systems were producing citizens who were healthier, smarter, and happier than they had ever been under council rule. Perhaps most importantly, human legal systems had eliminated the corruption and favoritism that had plagued council governments for centuries. Under human administration, justice was swift, fair, and absolutely impartial. Citizens who had lived their entire lives under the arbitrary rule of corrupt officials suddenly found themselves protected by laws that applied equally to everyone regardless of their species, social status, or personal connections. The Corvin Republic had been among the first major powers to switch sides. Their warrior culture, which had been stagnating under the Council's emphasis on peaceful resolution of conflicts, had found new life under human military doctrine. Corvan officers who had been limited by rigid promotion systems based on political connections were suddenly advancing based on merit and combat effectiveness. Young Corvan warriors who had been frustrated by the lack of worthy opponents were finding fulfillment in serving alongside human soldiers who shared their appreciation for skill and courage. The Trade Federation's betrayal had been purely economic. Human trading practices had proven to be more profitable for individual merchants than the carefully controlled markets that the Federation had maintained. Human technology had created new industries and new opportunities for wealth creation. Within months of human occupation, former Federation worlds were experiencing unprecedented economic growth and prosperity. Even the ancient Moltar Collective was showing signs of internal collapse as their younger generations embraced human concepts of individual achievement and personal freedom. The collective decision-making processes that had served their species for millennia were being abandoned in favor of human-style democratic institutions that actually allowed for disagreement and debate. Velthak's communication system chimed with an incoming message from the emergency session of the Council leadership. The few remaining loyal species were meeting in secret to discuss their increasingly desperate situation. As Velthak joined the conference, he found himself looking at the faces of leaders who had lost all hope of victory. "The humans have taken the Centauri cluster," reported Admiral Kethfor of the remaining hegemony forces. "Our defensive lines collapsed after their AI systems infiltrated our command networks. 17 ships surrendered without firing a shot. Their crews requested asylum under human protection. The situation in the Outer Rim is even worse," added Councillor Murthia of the ethereal remnant government. 3 more systems have declared independence from Council authority and requested admission to the Human Federation. Our own people are choosing to join our enemies rather than continue fighting alongside us. Velthak felt the weight of his species' impending doom pressing down on him like a physical force. The hegemony had been one of the founding members of the Galactic Council. They had helped establish the order that had kept peace in the galaxy for centuries. Now they were watching that order collapse under the assault of a species that they had foolishly believed to be inferior. "What of our request for assistance from the deep core worlds?" Velthak asked, grasping at the last remaining hope for salvation. "Refused," came the bitter reply. "They cite humanity's guarantee of safe passage for non-combatants as evidence that the humans are not the threat we claimed them to be. Several deep core governments have actually opened diplomatic relations with human representatives. The final insult came in the form of intercepted human communications that Council intelligence had managed to decrypt. The weapon systems that had devastated Council fleets, the technologies that had transformed conquered worlds, the AI networks that had outmaneuvered their best strategic minds, all of these were classified in human military documentation as legacy systems and outdated platforms. The humans had defeated the greatest military alliance in galactic history using weapons that they considered to be obsolete. Their truly advanced military capabilities remained unused, apparently being held in reserve for threats that the Council could not even imagine. This revelation raised terrifying questions about what humanity was really capable of. If their outdated weapons could eliminate entire fleets in minutes, what could their current generation systems accomplish? What kind of enemies were they preparing to face that required weapons more advanced than those that had brought the Council to its knees? Velthak terminated the conference and stood alone in his chambers, contemplating the ruins of everything his species had built over the course of millennia. Outside his window, the great spires of the hegemony capital still reached toward the stars, but they no longer represented power and authority. They were monuments to a civilization that had proven itself to be obsolete. The humans had not just defeated the Council militarily. They had demonstrated that their way of organizing society was superior in every measurable way. Their technology was more advanced, their social systems were more just, their economic methods were more prosperous, and their military doctrine was more effective than anything the galaxy had previously known. As Velthak watched human ships entering orbit around his homeworld, he realized that the Council had made a fundamental error in their understanding of what they were facing. They had believed that humanity was simply another species seeking a larger share of galactic power and resources. What they had actually awakened was a civilization that represented the next stage of galactic evolution. The humans had not come to conquer the galaxy in the traditional sense. They had come to replace it with something better, something that made the old council system look primitive and cruel by comparison. The war was effectively over. All that remained was for the galaxy to accept its new reality and hope that its new rulers would prove to be as benevolent as they claimed to be. But given what Velthak had seen of human capabilities and human nature, he was beginning to suspect that the galaxy's future under human leadership might actually be brighter than its past under council rule. The irony was almost too much to bear. In their attempt to subjugate humanity, the council had instead given them the justification they needed to subjugate everyone else. And they were doing it so effectively that their subjects were thanking them for the privilege. The siege of Nexus Prime began at exactly 0800 Standard Galactic Time and ended 14 hours later. The speed of the victory was not due to weak defenses. The Council's capital world was protected by energy shields that drew power from the combined output of 12-star systems and defensive platforms that had never been breached in 3 centuries of galactic warfare. The siege was short because Admiral Sarah Chen had decided to demonstrate the full scope of humanity's technological superiority, and 14 hours was how long it took to make her point absolutely clear. Chen stood on the bridge of the human flagship Terra Invicta, watching as her fleet's most advanced weapon systems came online for the first time in combat. The vessels around Nexus Prime were not the same ships that had fought the Council's forces over the past months. Those had been reserve units, older designs that humanity had been willing to risk in conventional battles. What surrounded the Council capital now represented the cutting edge of human military technology, weapons that redefined what was possible in galactic warfare. The planet's shields were impressive, by any standard in the galaxy. They could absorb the combined firepower of entire fleets without weakening. They had been designed by the greatest defensive engineers of a dozen species, and powered by energy sources that most civilizations could not even comprehend. Under normal circumstances, breaking such defenses would require months of sustained bombardment or years of siege warfare. Chen's weapons were not normal by any measure that the galaxy had previously understood. When the human fleet engaged the planetary shields, they did not attempt to overwhelm them with raw firepower. Instead, they deployed weapons that operated on principles that no other species had discovered. Reality manipulation devices that could fold space to bypass defensive barriers entirely. Temporal displacement weapons that could send attacks backward in time to strike before the defenses were raised. Quantum destabilizers that could cause the fundamental forces holding matter together to simply stop working. The shields that had protected Nexus Prime for centuries lasted exactly 6 hours and 27 minutes against humanity's assault. When they finally collapsed, the failure was so complete that the energy backlash destroyed half of the defensive platforms that had been generating them. But Chen was not interested in destroying the Council capital. Conquest through destruction was crude and wasteful, the approach of species that lacked the sophistication to achieve their goals through more elegant means. Instead, she ordered the deployment of humanity's most advanced AI infiltration systems. These artificial intelligences were unlike anything that had existed in the galaxy before. Where other species had developed computer programs that could follow complex instructions, humanity had created true digital consciousnesses that could think, learn, and make decisions independently. More importantly, they could transfer themselves through communication networks and take control of enemy systems from the inside. Within 3 hours of the shields falling, every major computer system on Nexus Prime was under human control. Traffic control networks, power distribution systems, communication arrays, even the environmental controls for individual buildings, all of it was suddenly being managed by AI systems that answered to human commanders, rather than council authorities. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Council leaders who had been preparing for a final desperate defense found themselves trapped in their own command centers as the building's security systems locked them in. Military commanders discovered that their weapons would not fire, and their ships would not respond to their orders. Government officials watched helplessly as their administrative systems began implementing human policies without their input or consent. The formal surrender came just 8 hours after the siege began. Councillor Velthak speaking on behalf of what remained of the Council leadership, appeared on every communication channel in the galaxy to announce the immediate cessation of hostilities and the transfer of governmental authority to human administration. But Chen's response surprised everyone, including many of her own officers. Standing in the same council chambers where humanity had been condemned just months earlier, she did not demand tribute or submission. She did not establish humanity as the new ruling species with all others serving as subjects. Instead, she announced something that no conqueror in galactic history had ever offered: the complete dissolution of the existing order and its replacement with something entirely new. "The Galactic Council is hereby dissolved," Chen announced, her words being transmitted across every inhabited world in the galaxy. "Its authority is ended, its laws are void, and its institutions are abolished. In its place, we establish the Terran Commonwealth, a voluntary federation of free worlds united by common principles rather than ruled by force." The terms that Chen offered were radical beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Membership in the new Commonwealth would be entirely voluntary. Worlds could choose to join or remain independent as they saw fit. Representation would be based on contribution to the common good rather than species or historical power structures. Individual rights would be protected by laws that applied equally to all citizens, regardless of their biological or cultural background. Most importantly, the Commonwealth would be governed by principles of merit and achievement, rather than birth or political connections. Leaders would be chosen based on their ability to improve the lives of their citizens. Policies would be evaluated based on their measurable results, rather than their conformity to tradition or ideology. The transformation that followed was swift and comprehensive. Human administrators backed by AI systems that made corruption impossible and inefficiency extinct began implementing changes that had been unthinkable under the old council system. Trade barriers that had protected established industries at the expense of consumers were eliminated. Legal systems that had favored the wealthy and well-connected were replaced with impartial justice networks. Educational institutions that had perpetuated class divisions were reformed to identify and develop talent regardless of social background. The results exceeded even humanity's expectations. Within a year of the Commonwealth's establishment, average living standards across member worlds had increased by measures that would have taken decades to achieve under the old system. Scientific research, freed from the political restrictions that had limited collaboration between species, began producing breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. Economic productivity soared as artificial barriers to trade and innovation were removed. Some species adapted to the new order better than others. The Corvan Republic embraced the Commonwealth's merit-based advancement systems with enthusiasm, finding that their warrior culture thrived under human concepts of earned honor and proven competence. Young Corvan officers who had been held back by rigid promotion hierarchies suddenly found themselves advancing based on their actual skills and achievements. The Ethereals experienced a cultural renaissance as their artists discovered the creative possibilities that opened up when they were free from the aesthetic restrictions imposed by their traditional caste system. Ethereal musicians began composing symphonies that incorporated human harmonic principles. Their visual artists produced works that combined traditional, ethereal techniques with human concepts of individual expression and emotional authenticity. Even the ancient Moltar collective found new vitality under the Commonwealth system. Their traditional decision-making processes, which had become slow and inefficient over the centuries, were supplemented with human organizational methods that preserved their cultural values while dramatically improving their practical effectiveness. The Trade Federation's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. Under the old council system, they had operated as a collection of cartels that controlled markets to maximize profits for established players. Under the Commonwealth, they became a genuine economic cooperative focused on raising living standards and creating opportunities for advancement throughout their territory. Dr. Marcus Webb, now serving as the Commonwealth's Director of Advanced Research, often reflected on the irony of their situation. Humanity's most terrible weapons, the technologies that had brought the greatest military alliance in galactic history to its knees, had ultimately been used to create an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. The weapons that could manipulate reality itself had been used to build, rather than destroy. The AI systems that could have enslaved entire civilizations had been deployed to eliminate corruption and inefficiency. The military technologies that could have established humanity as galactic overlords had instead been used to create a system where power was distributed based on merit rather than, or say as Admiral Chen looked out over Nexus Prime, now renamed New Geneva in honor of the human city, where the first international humanitarian organizations had been established. She smiled at the thought that the Council had ultimately gotten exactly what they had asked for. They had wanted humanity to know their place in the galactic order. Now they did. At the very top, reshaping the galaxy according to human principles of justice, efficiency, and individual opportunity.